right, after a while, we are back, and we are very happy to have a person here who I've known for a good while in the professional world. And the other day, I'm getting ready to wrap up work, and I get a phone call from this person. And normally, I get a phone call, and it's about a professional thing, but in one breath, in one single solid breath, he calls and he goes, "Nick, Pennsylvania, this is Chris. I am not here calling about a work thing. I'm calling here to tell you when I was back in 1982, and he tells me this story in like one breath, and I'm hooked. And so I've asked Chris if he would like to be on and talk to us tonight. He's an interesting person with a lot of shared passion for history and the grades to back it up, as well as interest in music, esoteric music, what I love, and a lot of a deep connection to some of the very historic sites in the Western and Central Pennsylvania region. So good evening, Brendan, and good evening, Chris. How you doing?
Well, I'd like to say I'm doing fine. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity, Nick and Brendan. I appreciate being on your podcast. The supernatural, folklore, unusual history, and of course, esoteric music, the styles of which you just can't get out of your head, are all of my reasons for going forward in the world. So, well, some of that and various Asian foods too. I have some addictions to that. But Nick, I had found out about your podcast, and I thought, well, I better let you know that my first story of anything supernatural, paranormal, transpired back when I was an infant. I mean, a babe in swaddling clothing. There I was in my little crib. I was in my parents' bedroom, my dad working the night shift, as factory workers are wont to do back in 1980, 1981. I'm old. But anyway, I don't recall this because, of course, I was in my infancy, but my mother woke up and smelled strong floral woman's perfume, the type of which that would have been worn in the previous century or the early days of the 20th century. Smelled it despite the fact that it was winter and the windows were shut. And I believe this is before the advent of Glade plugins, definitely, or any kind of scent dispensing items. So my mother, being, a diligent mom, called her mother up, and my grandmother was a survivor of the Depression and all that stuff. And she said, "Mom, I think there's something in the house. I think there's a ghost." My grandmother said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, I smelled an old woman's perfume. I think there's a ghost in the house." She said, "Get a hold of yourself. You're a parent now. Grow up." Click. And that was my first ghost story that I heard from the family. And it's interesting too, because my grandmother was one who grew up in a coal town outside of Latrobe called Whitney. And Whitney was a fascinating place because there were many different nationalities represented there all at one time. And there was also a large stray cat population. And she would talk about how eerie it was to hear the cats howling and meowing. And she said that she always thought it was, babies in the alley, and that's what kids believed. Well, at least some of them. So that was my first, I guess, dabble with the paranormal, but certainly not my last of hearing a good story.
Yeah. Of course, you've talked to me on a few occasions about your interest in these things, and it's kind of like coming in with Halley's Comet almost, to have a story so early on. And I know exactly what you mean. There was a lot of stray cats in my old neighborhood, probably not as much as there were back then and in that time and place. But when you're really out in nature and you hear some of those calls, you have to know what they are, because they can really freak you out. Because for people that have never heard what a fox actually says, it's, yeah,
terrifying.
Exactly.
3 a.m., you're in his hunting ground, and he's watching you from a bush.
So I'm curious, though, did you and your parents remain in that place for very long? And were there other incidents that you've heard about?
Honestly, no, which is interesting. It was, the house is still there. It's actually been very nicely remodeled. It's a beautiful property, nice siding, nice picket fence around it. We lived there till about 86, 87, in which we moved into my grandparents' old house, like a mile away or half mile away or so. Nothing eerie happened there afterwards. It was like a one-time occurrence, I think. I went down there once in 1998 to cut the grass. Of course, me being rather a chicken, and I'm not going to say a chicken what, but a chicken. I went in the house just to look around because I had a key and it was creepy, and I got the heck back out. But my dad went down and did work in the yard and stuff, and he never saw anything. So what's to say? Did she dream it? Did it happen? Was it a once-in-a-lifetime visitor? I mean, who knows? It wasn't like this, woman in a 19th century bustle was rocking me in my cradle or anything, but it's a neat story.
I think that's a really, really a fascinating, little tale. I'm glad that you said that, you don't remember it, because because you hear a lot of stories about people say, oh, well, when I was like, an infant or, 1 or 2 years old, and maybe it's just me, but like, I don't remember anything from back then. But I think it's fascinating, though, that your mother smelled a smell like that, which, does have, the distinction of being like, there's a lot of obvious things that your brain would immediately go to, like, oh, is there, like you said, like different detergent? Is there, did I cut fresh flowers earlier? Is the window open and there's a lilac bush blooming outside? There's a lot of places where your brain can go right away. But once you kind of eliminate all those things, I think that it's interesting your mother immediately went to, is this on the paranormal side of the spectrum? My question is more about your mother, not so much the house. Like, what do you think in her history or in her way of viewing the world led her to go to that conclusion, do you think?
I'm going to be honest with you. I have no clue, because that's largely out of character for my mom.
Really?
She's not one that puts a whole lot of credence into things that, that she can't see and touch and feel. Obviously smell freaks her out, I guess. There was nothing that I know of to this day. My mom's, pretty tough, pretty brave lady. Raised me. So, but at the same time, she's not one to, get spooked and say, oh, like that's probably a ghost out there. But
well, I think that goes to show, though, how powerful of an instance it was for her, the fact that she would go out of character like that, and then go a step further to call your grandmother, who sounds like you said, wasn't kind of given to those kind of things either.
It definitely makes the story much more interesting to me. Like, how strong was that smell that she wasn't so ready to dismiss it in a very practical way that it sounds like she does other things.
Yeah, and it's in olfactory, like memory, we all know how important that is and how it's tied to certain things. And when you smell something that you identify as like, oh, that smells like honeysuckle, and I know there's no honeysuckle outside, that's something that's so specific, it's very hard to like dismiss away. And a lot of what you're saying reminds me, I'm not sure if either of you have read the book by Josh Cutchin, Brimstone Deceit, which is all about the paranormal and specifically just smells. How they come up, and it comes up a lot in fairy lore and in different folklore here in the United States. And just like you said, Chris, one of them is smelling. It's like you said, floral perfumes, or a lot of times you hear like pipe smoke, or things that in some cases may have a worldly explanation, but they're so out of place that, coupled with usually another experience, it kind of like helps like kind of validates. But this one being on its own is so interesting in how your mother reacted.
I was thinking too, to being sorry, Chris, I'll be very quick, but being just a singular incident, to the best of your knowledge, that because I know we've talked in the past about how wood can hold on to smells. And when there's humidity changes, and I don't know if I've ever shared here or if I've ever told you, Chris, but I know Brendan is familiar with. My wife and I bought a house. It was our first house. It was just devastated. We filled 3 full-size dumpsters. It was a mess. And the basement was so bad we had to wear respirators. Now, the wood steps down to the basement. Every once in a while, when it was raining out, I would go down the wood steps to go do some laundry, or we had a pool table down there, which was very fun. And I would get the memory of the smell. Like, it was just enough to like brought me all back to that summer we spent cleaning the house out. And we've talked about that with some other places. So if that was what it was, I would expect your mom to have told you other times smelling that same, and boy, wasn't that the darndest thing? And so when I think of things like pipe smoke, I think about, like, I can tell one of the things we do with seeing if an instrument really is an authentic vintage antique instrument is the film or the smell, especially of the case, because everything old nowadays smells like cigarettes because they're so removed in a way that we weren't even a short time ago. And I apologize. I had to get that thought out. Chris, you were going to say something else there.
Oh, no, I was just going to point out, though, that one more interesting bit was the fact that both my mom's grandmothers were still alive when that occurred. So it couldn't have been them. I don't know who lived in the house prior. I mean, that's something I'd like to look up. It's a P.O. box, though. So that might, but it's in a tiny town. You drive through it. But yeah, now my grandpa was more for folklore and stories and scary things and things that go bump in the night. He liked that. In fact, he told me about growing up and watching Frankenstein in the movie theater and having a hard time sleeping by the light of the flickering candle because they didn't have electricity upstairs.
Well, was this the Lon Chaney Frankenstein?
No, was it?
Was it not Lon Chaney who did Frankenstein, the 1930s one?
Was it Lon Chaney? I know he saw Dracula too, and he said Dracula really scared him too, which I've watched both. It's different when you have a room full of lights and
and the comfort of not being kind of out in the country a bit.
Well, my grandpa grew up in a coal town too. It was called Snydertown. He always told me that it was named after the horse thief, a gentleman by the name of Snyder, who was hanged from a local tree back in the 1700s, which there's no way. It's absolutely no way that could have happened. But I always had this image of this man riding off with a long, spindly mustache with a black cape on and a
Snidely Whiplash.
Snidely Whiplash with a cocked hat on his head, and he's, it's raining and they catch him. But the property where the tree was is now a private place. It's no trespassing, and the tree has since gone, but it had been the grounds of the original St. Rose Church in Snydertown and Bradenville. Two of the originals, they both burned down. They were both wooden, but I had the pleasure of spending quite a bit of time in my grandpa's house where he grew up as a boy, and it was built, I later found out, in the 1880s. He always talked about there being a resident spirit that he recalled as a kid. He called him Old Man Hobart.
That's very specific. I like that.
Yeah. Here's the thing, though. I have not been able to find any reference to an Old Man Hobart. However, I did find that the people that lived in the house prior, there was like 8 kids. They had 2 bedrooms upstairs. The way my grandparents' house was set up, it was all on one floor. The upstairs was like my grandpa's 2 office/junk areas. And because my grandmother couldn't walk up and down the stairs. So there were 2 beds downstairs in what would have been the old living room, and then the kitchen, living room area. And I remember staying overnights there almost every Saturday night. Sunday morning, we'd go to church together. And I remember watching those steps because my grandpa would say, "All right, Chris, all right, you're going to see Old Man Hobart come down those steps one of these nights." And I thought, oh, that's just great. I thought that's great. And this house, like I said, built in the 19th century. It's all nice, the old-fashioned woodwork, stuff like that, but it's dark too. And I never heard it the entire time he was alive. And once I remember staying down there after my grandpa passed, and I mean, I didn't do one night in that part of the house, that bedroom. I was on the floor next to my grandmother's couch because I swear I heard somebody shuffling upstairs.
Oh, geez. See, now I was going to say, when you said you never heard anything, I was going to say, boy, if only you could go back and tell like 10-year-old Chris that you're not going to hear anything. Don't worry about it. But
trust me, 10-year-old Chris would have really appreciated that on night. It was eerie. The groovy part of that house was where the bathroom was. I mean, you could see this. they had a little farm there. So there was an old barn that was sort of broken down. And then there was an old outhouse up on the hill and an old chicken coop. There was also an Orthodox Christian cemetery on the hill behind the house. And darned if some of those tombstones didn't look like they glowed, especially the ones that had the little blue candles on them. You get, and it's very wooded. It was very, very peaceful down there. Like, you didn't hear thunderstorms as bad. It didn't seem to get as windy down there. But I mean, I remember I would run through that cemetery and remember seeing all the kids' graves, you know, especially the ones up by the pines at the top of the hill. But no, let's see, he would always talk about that. And I'll probably end up looking again tonight to see if there's any, you know, references to a Hobart family or however it might have been. It might have been spelled differently.
Well, I'm wondering that. I'm wondering if it's a pronunciation thing. Like, I'm wondering if there's a Hobart. I'm wondering if there's any of those names in that cemetery, because I'm sure that he, as a child, probably encountered that name somewhere, right?
I have a little bit of a tie-in. Like I said, my grandpa if he were alive today, he'd be like 101 years old, which he would be on this podcast though, because it's so legendary, and I can't find the picture. But he always talked about when he and his buddies, apparently back in the 20s and 30s, you didn't have a whole lot to do, so you would go exploring. And he was up in the cemetery, and he saw the tombstone of a man by the name of John Smith. Now, this is an Eastern European predominantly cemetery. John Smith stands out.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure.
he got a picture of himself laying on top of his grave site with a flower, right? He married John Smith's granddaughter in 1947.
Seriously.
Unbeknownst to him. And
John Smith is rolling in his grave right now.
Somewhere my grandpa was like, "Step aside, son. Let me tell you some stories."
That's wild. That is wild. I mean, like, you could say like, oh, it's a small town, you know, like, you know, people are, you know, related to everything, but like,
oh no,
especially if it's like this wasn't. Oh, okay.
No, this was a small town, but she was also from where Bradenville is in Whitney. That nowadays is a 5-10 minute drive. In those days, you had your choice of foot leather or streetcar.
Oh, okay. So it was significantly further away.
There would have been a distance,
practically speaking, yeah.
But people moved around differently. He was at St. Vincent too back in the late 30s. And I don't know if you gentlemen have researched this at all, but there was a legend of a monk.
Wait, this is St. Vincent's College, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Of a monk actually appearing and telling students that there was no purgatory, it's just heaven or hell.
No, I've never heard this story.
What?
Yeah, there's a legend.
Now, so St. Vincent's, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, we're in Latrobe.
Yeah.
St. Vincent's College, been around for a little while. It is a Catholic college, correct?
Yep, Benedictine monastery, Catholic seminary and college. Founded by Boniface Wimmer, who on the night of Bona's birthday, or was it his death day? I don't know. Where he supposedly walks the halls.
That's wild.
Yep.
I'm making a note. We're gonna look into that. That sounds fascinating.
If I can't find it, I'll bunk myself. But he is scary to look at too. His beard, enormous.
Well, one of the things I definitely wanted to hear from you, because you brought up Latrobe. Oh, yep. You finished your thought. And
oh no, no, his beard is flowing. He was a very, very stern man, I guess. But that's just local lore. I picked that up in '98 when I started college at St. Vincent's. I did a year there before transferring out. You know, wanted to go to Slippery Rock and have the experience. And let me tell you, in whatever part, if you guys have me back, I will tell you all about living on Main Street.
Oh, we will definitely have you back, because I'll tell you about, I would crash at my friend's place at the Alamo.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
I know you know the Alamo, because
who doesn't know the Alamo? That's
if you were weird at all, you ended up at the Alamo for a time. And
weird, normal, you know, extraterrestrial, you name it, you will everybody there. But no, St. Vincent had there was a couple other ones There were legends that the monks took sides during the Civil War, which there's no way they could have. But there was a belief that the Confederate monks and Union monks would rise from their graves on Halloween night, fight each other in this never-ending battle of.
This sounds a lot like your 18th century horse thief in an area we know was very sparsely European population in that time.
Yeah, 18th century, you would have been very foolish to live in southwestern PA and not have a strongly built blockhouse and a number of people with you.
Yeah, and that brings me to another thing that one of the reasons I was really excited about bringing you here, Chris, is because I know how much you know about that period and about, again, this is the area we live in, western and central Pennsylvania, and specifically with those blockhouses and those forts, those wooden forts, because I know you have done a lot of reenactment and historical education at these places, and I know you got some stories about that. I'm just kind of eager to sit back and hear some of this.
Which ones do you want? Do you want my stuff from Fort Ligonier? You want Fort Niagara?
Brendan, how about you?
I want to hear the Fort Ligonier stuff because me and my brother have actually been planning a trip there sometime in the next few months. So I'm going to vote for Fort Ligonier first.
So I will give you guys the caveat. I do not know how much they permit people to go in and actually do any kind of serious ghost hunting investigating. But, if you ask some of the staff, they'll tell you stories if things have happened. Look for a kid named Spencer. He'll tell you about what he did or what he set off. So I had an internship in Fort Ligonier in 2006, and it was sort of the butt of everybody's joke because they told me right away, "Oh yeah, it's haunted up there. Oh, you're gonna see and hear things 24/7," which was terrifying to me because I thought, "Oh great, I'm not gonna pass because I would be too scared." I would sit in the fort part, the reconstructed fort part, and I would just wait for guests to come up and say things. And sometimes I would pass out or take a little nap after eating lunch or from boredom, and people would appear. And I'm like, where'd you come from? Like that. Not exactly paranormal, but I had a lady come the one day, and she claimed to be a psychic from New Derry. And I don't know if you guys know anything about New Derry. It's an interesting place. It's outside
I'm familiar with New Derry. It's right outside of Greensburg, Pennsylvania, correct?
Like down the road from Greensburg if you're off 22 or one of those two. It's actually older than Derry itself. It's called New Derry because it was Scots Irish settlers. They settled it and named it in honor of Londonderry.
Gotcha.
At any rate, this woman proceeded to enter the fort, and she's looking around. And she said, "There's a lot of residual energy in this area." And I thought to myself, "Oh, here we go." And my day is ruined. And she's walking around, and she walked around and said, "Okay." And over here, I see blue-coated artillerymen, which the British Army in the 18th century, they did wear blue coats in the artillery. Like, okay, there's an artilleryman. He walks back and forth in front of the door, and there's a chance you'll see him out of the corner of your eye. And I said, "Oh, okay, yeah, thanks." And then she said,
this is like shooting fish in a barrel because I mean, you should probably give people kind of a notice of like what's the story of Fort Ligonier historically, because this is like walking into a gas station saying I'm seeing a mechanic,
Fort Ligonier was the last stop on the Forbes campaign of 1758 that was charged with the reduction of Fort Duquesne, a powerful French installation at the forks of the Ohio, where we call Pittsburgh today. And Fort Ligonier was built to be a supply fort in order so that when Forbes, heaven forbid, he be routed by the enemy, he could stop, refresh, reorganize, and then march out again, as compared to Braddock, who unfortunately made a one-stop trip and ended up, the campaign went into shambles. So the British learned, and there was artillery. There was over 5,000 people living there at one time.
That's way more than I thought.
Yeah, 1,500 at first to build it, and $5,000 total, or a little over 5,000, including but not limited to English, Irish, Welsh, Scots, Manx, Scots, Irish, Virginians, Marylanders. I'm trying to think what other colors. Cherokee and Catawba Indians, and also some African Americans that were free. Not to mention women, children, Germans, Dutch, so forth.
And I've seen the reconstructed fort. It's mostly a wooden blockade, is it not? Or
so it's in the style of the 18th century, like almost like a star fort. However, Forbes wanted something cheap and quick, so Forbes, the general in charge, was very keen on getting it built and getting it done, because on October 12th, the fort was attacked by a party led by Captain Charles Philip Aubrey of the Troupe de la Marine, who I happen to represent as a reenactor. And he was actually out of the Illinois territory, he and his troops. So they attacked. Less than 600 French and Indian allies stormed across the Lohanna Creek, attacked the lower area of the fort where the museum is today, chased in the grass guards. They were routed by cannon fire from the fort eventually. And that was the glorious Battle of Fort Ligonier. And there was quite a few deaths. All in all, it gave the French the impression that, hey, the British are here to stay and they're building something strong and we're in a lot of trouble. So come 1766, French and Indian Wars are over. Ligonier, the town, has built up. Great Britain decides we're going to pull the plug on all those frontier forts, save the money. Ironically, they pulled out all the iron and all the metal and anything of value and left the wood. So, Nick, you're looking at me with brows furrowed. Where did the wood go? Into the local homes.
Not surprised, but waste not, want not.
Absolutely. Well, it's also southwestern PA, so how much wood was left that was salvageable? There is a lot of history on that hill in and of itself, and so that's Fort Ligonier. That's Fort Ligonier in a nutshell. I can go into the details, nitty gritties of that in the future, but the psychic.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you started by saying the psychic, and I just wanted to make it clear so anybody was wondering what this fort's about. So, sorry, go on. So the psychic.
Great question. It was never I'll give you another fun tidbit. It was never an American installation, ever.
That is interesting.
The United States flag does not fly off of its ship's mast of a flagpole. The British flag flies, the Union Jack, and that is the only place in the United States where that's permissible.
That is interesting.
Oh,
I never knew that.
Yep.
Because there were so many forts around this area, because we were the frontier. We were that borderland between Nouveau France and the British colonies. And of course, being as we are, like we are in the midst of the Appalachians, and some of these forts, like I'm familiar with Fort Wolf right outside of Washington, Pennsylvania, was not much bigger than the room I'm in right now, is my understanding.
There's a big difference. Sometimes things were called forts that were really blockhouses. They were also called stations. And why they called them that was this, Nick. Say you're a small dirt farmer with 15 kids and a wife that's cross-eyed but good-natured. You're sitting there whittling your stick, and you hear gunshots nearby, and you realize, we're under attack, better get to the blockhouse. So a blockhouse was somewhere you could get pretty quickly. Everybody goes in, has a musket, and they start blazing away. The walls are thick. It's all wood. It's set back from the woods, from the trees, to make it harder to snipe. So that's a lot of those places were called stations or stations or forts, but in reality, they were just blockhouses. But Fort Ligonier, compared
to those, Ligonier's a massive place. So
Ligonier, actually, it has a moat. It has batteries for cannons. And it's a real installation. But so this psychic, this lady, who again I didn't give a lot of credence to, because I thought she was just stirring the pot, came into the building where I sat, which was the quartermaster, where the food was stored, ironically. And she said, "Now, do you ever notice these mannequins moving?" I said, "Ma'am," I said, "I'm going to be honest with you. I'm up here all day by myself. Like, I don't need this." Yes, I do notice them moving. I swear to God, they move every time I wake up from my nap. And she goes, "Well, yeah, they do move." And I said, "Oh, really?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, there's a lot of spirits in here, all residual, though. They don't pay any attention to you." And I said, "Okay." And the maintenance guy that's with me was 69 years old at the time, former Korean War vet. He's laughing, trying so hard not to laugh in this woman's face. She goes outside, went to the next building, same thing, same spiel. Then it took a turn for the worse. And there is a building that was discovered by the archaeologists, but not by the historians, or not on the maps, not on the charts, not on by the engineers. This building was set up as a blacksmith shop, even though it never was, due to the lack of ventilation. And she came down there and she said, boy, you ever get the feeling somebody doesn't want you in this area? And I said, every day of the week, ma'am. Why? And she goes, oh, there's something not so nice down here. It's not nice. And I said, what do you mean it's not nice? Well, it doesn't, it's territory. This is its spot. It doesn't like people. I said, okay, ha, ha, ha. I never put two and two together. The directors at the time were big time science people, no religion, no supernatural beliefs. The wife would always say, well, every once in a while say to me, hey, Chris, don't open that building today. Just let it shut. Just tell people there's nothing down there. I never questioned as to why. So then we continued the walk and we got to another quartermaster's building where the outfitting occurred, maybe tent stakes and pots, pans, furs, all that kind of stuff. And the lady goes, wow, there's something really, really powerful here. And her demeanor had changed a bit. She was a little more grave. And she said, this is really strong stuff right here. And I said, what is it? And she goes, I don't know. It doesn't want me to know. And it doesn't have to tell me. And I said, okay, whatever. And I didn't think really anything of it. And then she said, yeah, there's been like ceremony here or something, or people spent time here. There were Paleo-Indian fire spots found where somebody had a meal up on that hill a couple thousand years ago. So the psychic picked up on that. That is not something I normally talked about on my tours, because it was most people, they hear Paleo-Indian and they say something about Fred Flintstone and then I kick them out, or at least I want to. So that was eerie. She said it was like a very mystical or magical place because it was so not primeval, but so ancient. And I said, well, can it interact with us? And she goes, it chooses not to. And I said, whoa, okay. And then sadly, people heard her talking, and John Q. Public got very curious. And they said to her, hey, can you read my palm? And she started reading people's palms. Next thing you know, two guests are running down the hill crying their eyes out because she just told them exactly everything they'd ever wanted to hear. And I had to say very nicely, ma'am, I've had a lot of fun with you up here today, but hey, you got to stop. This is my internship. This is 6 credits out of 9. Like, you got to go. And I mean, she left, but that wasn't the end of my Fort spookiness. Nick, if you want me to stop there, I have other.
No, we definitely want to talk about some of that. I know you're revving at it, so go right ahead, Brendan.
Yeah, so keep going. Yeah, I have lots of thoughts, but let's just keep going. Yeah, this is great.
Okay, keep going. Then.
It was a weird day. The gentleman that I was with, Steve Kimmick, is still alive. He's in his 80s, spry as ever. The guy, if you have an off sense of humor, you and Steve will get along just great. And so, he would always mess with me. I would fall asleep and he would beat on drums and empty containers trying to make me think the fort was under attack. But at any rate, there were other stories from up on the hill. Reenactors like to tell stories. They like to swap tall tales. And the Highlanders were notorious for that. There was a group that I got to chit-chatting with, and I said, any visitors last night of a supernatural form? And he goes, yeah, as a matter of fact, we did. And I said, oh, come on. And he said it 2, 1, 2, 3 in the morning, something like that. There was a mist and a slight breeze, and from that breeze, he and his buddy who was up, one had to go to the bathroom, and they were up, and in the dim light they saw Highlanders coming through the mist, kilts, claymores, muskets. And according to the man, he said, oh, I approached them. I said, and what did they say to you? Would you like some tea? And he said, no. He put his hand out and pushed me down on my knees, and we prayed together, and they disappeared. And I said, what were you high on? Like, really? Like, that's a little too.
That's a lot.
But there was another reenactor. There was like, yeah, it was creepy. Like this, there was that one. And then the other one from up on the hill is the shoulder check. A guy who's not so prone for flights of fancy said he was walking through the gate at the top of the hill, which is ironically the front gate, but it looks like a back gate. He said somebody sort of plowed into him as he was walking through it one night, but there was nobody there.
So he didn't see it. He just felt it.
He didn't see it. He felt it. But when you go to Fort Ligonier, people forget that not only did the Paleo Indians and early Alligaways and other early nations live out in that area, people lived there as part of Ligonier. That was Fort Ligonier. That was Ligonier Hill, or what is it? No, Fort Hill and Ligonier, PA. People built houses there. People raised families. People died. People were born on that hill. So what's to say some of that energy, maybe not from the fort, could be from those houses, somebody we don't know. So there was that. Plus, I mean, the archaeologists that have gone over the grounds have found quite a few interesting items, including but not limited to a 1916 license plate from a car, the creepiest little porcelain baby doll head you'll ever see from the 19th century, a little comb, keys, marbles. So families lived up there, kids lived up there.
Just a real quick question, because you mentioned that, once the fort was kind of dismantled and then the parts of it repurposed, you talk about they built houses on that site, people lived there. When were those houses taken down? When was the fort reestablished as a historical thing?
1950s. The 1950s. That really
seems to be when we see a lot of that happen, because I think if you've ever been, and if you've ever been to the Stone House here or down in Florida, I know that the shell forts down in St. Augustine, there's two of them, and they were, I believe it was in the 1940s or 50s that they were reestablished. Much needed attention was paid to them.
Well, in 1958 would have been 200 years since the Forbes expedition. And
good point.
So in Forbes, actually, Washington was at Fort Ligonier, spent quite a bit of time there, caused a lot of headaches because he was a complainer. Forbes, who was dying of intestinal cancer of some sort, actually spent Christmas 1758 and went back to Philly, where he died in March 1759.
Washington was a bit of a dandy, and I'd imagine that being out in Ligonier would have been much of a party for him.
Well, Washington was pro-Virginia, and he wanted Virginia to control the forks of that Ohio River.
Sorry, here's my quick thing. As I understand it, Virginia had a sea-to-sea charter, and they tried to lay claims to the regions of western Pennsylvania. And during the Revolution, or immediately before the Revolution, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania declared war on the Commonwealth of Virginia because of grandfathered land grants that Jefferson was writing as then governor.
There was skirmishing. Actually, Jefferson didn't get to be governor till after the Revolution began. It was actually a Scotsman by the name of Lord Dunmore, and he was a nasty, nasty critter. And he was the one that really staked the military claim to southwestern PA to make it part of Virginia. And he's also the one, Battle of Point Pleasant, Mothman. So
yes.
Those were his troops that day that were on campaign. And Lord Dunsmore, he causes a lot more problems throughout the Revolution. But no, Washington was mad because they didn't use Braddock's Road. They used the road going a road west from Philly, which meant Pennsylvania merchants had better access to these furs as compared to his Virginians and his Virginia company in Ohio. Well, no, his Ohio company.
And Braddock's Road is now US 40, correct? That's First National Road, as I recall.
Yep. And that's all well documented down in the museum when you go down there. And it's strongly, you could take a whole day down in the museum itself. But I will tell you that I believe that there is a lot down there that would attract the supernatural. There are priceless artifacts, including but not limited to Captain Salmoret's frock coat that has a large hole in it from where a piece of grape shot put an end to his naval career one fine day.
Wow.
The one that I find very interesting is the Hermitage, which was what Arthur St. Clair called his house. Arthur St. Clair was a Scotsman that later became good friends with George Washington and rose to prominence in southwestern PA politics before the Revolution, and was the caretaker of Fort Ligonier till it was till it was what do you call it, defunded and closed down,
decommissioned. Yeah.
Decommitted. Yes. St. Clair was a favorite of Washington's, which led him to be protected. He gave up Fort Independence during the Saratoga campaign, to which Adams said, if we shot more generals, we'd hold more positions. But yeah, he was not well liked. He was getting older. He had an alcohol problem, but he had married smart. He married Phoebe Bayard, who was a known and vivacious woman from Philadelphia. And the legends hold from the staff that worked in the museum, when the museum had a basement, which has since all been closed off. They remodeled the museum, but they would hear her running, supposedly, up and down the floors. Even the old directors who were not into that kind of stuff would hear, and they would say, "Oh, that's just Phoebe up there. That's just Phoebe." Well, Phoebe was all good and all until one night when she allegedly shook a large metal gate that was closing off one of the exhibits so nobody could get in. Apparently that scared the maintenance cleaning people pretty badly. And
why did they think it was Phoebe?
Well, Phoebe had mental health issues, according to legend, significant mental health issues. She was reputed to have done naked cartwheels down the lane to go get the mail from the post horses.
Must have made her very popular.
She was an interesting sort. The road, there is a marker on Route 30 East, right when you get to the bend before you get to the Sleepy Hollow. It's off to the right. Stone, like a little stone do up, and it's to Arthur St. Clair. But anyway, so part of his house was salvaged because he lost everything, all his money to the revolution and bad business deals. And the house was moved and put in the museum. And one day I was giving a tour through the museum, and I happened to say, well, this is part of the house of General Arthur St. Clair, who was also first governor of the Northwest Territory and alcoholic failure of a general, but he had Washington's favor, so he was safe. And I am not kidding you, there was no air conditioning in that room. I was inside the room, it's the house itself, and I just felt cold. And I'm like, son of a gun, I just made somebody mad. So I was General St. Clair, my apologies. I was a little too harsh and injudicious in my words, and my best 18th century language, and luckily I said, please don't follow me home tonight or visit me. And, the guests, yeah, it did get cold, ha, ha, ha. And I said, you never know. But yeah, Phoebe was known, his wife was known to have, or at least reputed to have mental health issues. And so they attribute a lot of things that happened there to Phoebe. They'll say, oh, that's just Phoebe. Oh, that's just Phoebe. Well, that's okay. I don't need Phoebe to help me do and when you go in the museum, you're going to see artifacts that could have killed people. There are items. There was a set of beads that have since been removed and repatriated, but there were beads from a child's grave that were somehow purchased by the fort and sent right back to the nation when they found out. So, because they don't buy anything from grave robbers. But, it's all of that death, associated with weapons, not to mention where the fort's built was the cow pasture where the French and Indians attacked in 1758.
Yeah, it sounds like there's just but
it's all legend and lore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all legend and lore, and it seems like so much of it is wrapped up, like kind of like you said, there's so much has happened right there.
Yep.
And so much has happened, so many different things have happened with like Nick was saying, the materials, and some of it just important or some of it mundane. It seems like it really kind of runs the gamut. And I think that's what's so interesting about it, because it sounds like from an activity standpoint, some of it is, the kind of folkloric stuff that you would kind of expect out of a place like this.
That's what I get for us.
Yeah. But there seems like there's also things that seem kind of a little more out of, like, you wouldn't necessarily expect, like you were saying with that psychic, who all three of us at least are probably the same mindset, that we're a little on the skeptical side when it comes to how those things typically work. But every time I say I'm skeptical of psychics, I hear a story like what you're talking about. And I think like, that's just so specific. It really makes you wonder, are they tapping into something? Whenever you hear those kind of stories from me, I think it makes the place and the location so much more alive.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like with you guys doing the reenacting and everything and leading the tours, trying to legitimately educate people on how things were back then and giving context to things people either didn't know about or giving context to things that people just had misunderstandings about. That's such important work that you'd have to think, if there are conscious spirits there or something like that, some of them may appreciate it, and like you said with some of the other locations, some of them might not.
Well, funny,
it's so interesting.
Funny you said that. When someday, when we talk about my adventures at Old Fort Niagara, I'll leave you with this little bit of a tidbit. They do appreciate it. They do appreciate it because my captain from my unit, very passionate, very, very passionate French and Indian War history buff. Not even a buff. He comes from a line of the original French and Indian War reenactors. So, I mean, this man's like
wow. Yeah.
He's the real deal. He has spent numerous nights alone in Old Fort Niagara. Numerous nights. And one night he was camping out there. He had music playing from the movie Last of the Mohicans.
We've had to play that same music at a wedding before, so yes.
I love it. That's one of my favorite. I love it. So yeah.
He was listening to that and just relaxing there, and he's like, I did not feel alone. He seen men wearing hats up on the ramparts, because the Coast Guard, there's a Coast Guard installation right there. And I will tell you, though, when I run my tours, any historical site, I pay a little homage to the people that lived and died there. I always say, keep in mind that people suffered and died and loved and hated and all that here, and that we show them respect. We don't come here and say, oh, this is awful dumb. No,
I think when it comes to both historical sites, and especially ones that are known or have a propensity for people thinking they're haunted or have spiritual activity or whatever, you have so many people that think that, and this is one of my big problems with especially a lot of like ghost hunting shows, quote unquote, and things like that. They're coming in, and doing whatever. And if these, let's say hypothetically, there are spirits, and they are spirits of people who once lived just like we all live. If someone came into an important place of yours and started doing these certain things, you wouldn't be happy with it either. And but conversely, you have someone who comes in, like you were just saying, who's very respectful, trying to pay homage to it, trying to educate. That's like, that approach seems so much more human to me.
Yeah, just to kind of go off what you're saying there, Brendan, we talk about priming, that some places will prime us, some subtext will prime us to kind of see, like we talk a lot about, well, of course it's haunted. It's an old Victorian mansion and it needs a new coat of paint. Of course it's haunted. And I think what you're kind of saying is, yeah, if hypothetically, if this is here and you're making it perform tricks and stunts, it's kind of patronizing. Whereas I do think there's a priming element, not only in that we are being made very aware of the historicity of this place, and just by its being what it is, it's already associated with some negative and some traumatic things. And then on top of that, the people who are there, like yourself, Chris, or the people that visit, like you and I, we are there and we are holding a reverence for people, very real, tangible people and tangible items that came before. And I've never thought about this. I've seen amputated legs, I've seen bones, but I've never looked at a weapon and thought that could have killed.
That could have ended somebody's day.
Yeah. It ended their whole month even. But yeah, I've never thought about it like that. It really is. And that's that deep sense of reverence that even if you don't believe it. And I'm still on that Poe line where, I've never believed it, but I've lived in fear of it all my life just the same. There is a real awe at when you think about and you consider the passage of time. And when we were listening to Eartha White a few weeks ago, Brendan, and a woman whose own mother had been born into slavery, and we're hearing her voice and knowing that this is a woman who died just a few years before we were born, it's weird because we think of so much time has passed, and yet here are the threads that they wore before us. That's reverence to me. That's all.
Neat thing that people don't know is Fort Ligonier has the largest collection of shoe leather in North America.
This is why I keep you around, Chris.
Yeah. And here's what's cool about it. Those shoes wore out quick out on the frontier because of how rough the terrain was. But no, there's a couple other little local legends. I work at, as you can tell, an amusement park. I'm not going to say what name, but it's in Ligonier. Very nice place, but at night it takes on a different character. It's funny when you go to the park as a kid, it's magical and it's mystical, and then you become a teenager and it's a place to look at girls, or look for your buddies or pig out. And you get to be an adult and it loses its magic. It's funny. I worked there on the weekends as a de-stressor and as a way to make extra money. And, I heard a couple of pretty good ghost stories actually about the big bandstand, the main dance hall, hearing upbeat, raggy, big band, swingish type music at night. The guards hearing it when there's no sound. And when it gets quiet out there, it's very still. When there's no cars flying up and down 30,
yeah, I'd imagine, because, the Lincoln Highway is right there, but it is not the road travel that it once was, especially late at night. And it's tucked in a holler there. It's one of the most beautiful drives, driving between Greensburg, Pennsylvania, and Latrobe, because it is just lush and rocky. And I think that's the Loyal Hannah that runs down through there.
Is where that's near there, but that's the Loyal Hannah River Valley near there. And the Loyal Hannah was actually moved to put in Route 30. At one time, the Loyal Hannah Creek actually abutted Fort Ligonier's property, which was one of the reasons why it was built there, because the creek was so close. But at any rate, so you can hear the band music. That's park started as a train stop for people to get out.
A lot of our parks, like Kennywood and Waldemere and Erie, and I'm sure across America, they were trolley parks, or where the end of the trolley line was.
Since then, it grew up and it became something bigger, and people, now it's an amusement park, but it never lost its very rustic, you're in the woods at the mercy of nature. So when I worked there as a young man in college, I worked at the pool. Close at 7 to usher all the guests into main park so they could, get people all in one sort of general location for the park to close closer to 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, which it doesn't do that anymore, but that's another story. And that would usually leave me down there counting items and the crickets and the bear and various and sundry other critters and bugs out there making noises at night. But my grandpap my family had cabins. They called them cottages behind the park. They were purchased by my great-great-grandfather in the 1890s. He fancied himself a bit of a farmer. That's what he was in Europe. And he had cattle and hay and things like that. And they hunted and fished and lived back there in the summer to escape the heat of the big town of Latrobe back in the 1890s, early 1900s.
Latrobe up on the hill, in this area being down in the cool holler and everything.
This was in the woods, out in the middle of nowhere. The fashionable, this is the part of Pennsylvania where the billionaires and millionaires of their time came to play. They had cabins, and my grandpa would always say, you can hear Indian drums at night. Well, I never put too much credence into that, and I didn't think too much of it. But I used to like to scare the security guards, or rent-a-cops, as we call them, that would have to spend the night. And they're usually younger people like our age who are, maybe going to the police academy or something, or moonlighting as a security guard. And
I was once a security guard myself for a call center. I'll leave it at that.
And the one poor guy, there's no such thing as ghosts. Don't even try that crap with me. The next morning when I came in bright and early, he was leaving. He's like, "You weren't kidding about those drums." I said, "Yes, I was." I said, "There's no drums out there." He's like, "There's drums out there." And I heard them. And I'm like, I just looked down. I said, "You've got to be kidding." He said, "Nope. I heard drums off in the distance, real faint." It got to the point where, now it was back in the early 2000s, 2 summers ago, or no, was it last summer? Last summer, I said that to one of the guards, and the guy that's the head of the security guards, the former head, Mr. Tom Paola, he looks at me and he goes, "Hey, don't be telling that kind of stuff." And I said, "Why?" He goes, "I don't need those guys calling me at 2:00 in the morning saying they're hearing Indian drums," because I guess was getting calls about drums, about music, hearing music up on the hill where the bandstand was. And those are the fun things I like to tell guests when they come. And like, "Ooh, is this place," especially for Halibu, if you listen in the woods close enough.
Hey everyone, it's Bond again for the Ghost Furnace. Due to some technical difficulties, that is where we're going to end tonight's episode. But not to worry, that is certainly not the last time we're going to have our good friend Chris on the show. In the meantime, if you have a story or some feedback or just want to get a hold of us, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at the Ghost Furnace Podcast, or send us an email at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com. And if you like what you hear, the best thing you can do for us is to rate and review on whatever podcatcher you happen to be listening to us on. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful night.